One of the interesting dynamics in California is they're short on power. They have a ton of projects waiting to be developed, but they got nowhere to put them because the grid, if you will, the interconnection is full.
How does that problem potentially get solved?
I think battery storage is transitional. The battery storage concept is a means to an end, and the end might not include battery storage. And I think this is a good answer for utilizing interconnection that may exist.
Welcome to the InnerGenius Podcast with Joe Patch IV.
All right, I want to welcome everyone to another episode of the InnerGenius Podcast. I'm super excited today about our guest. We have Dan Harmon on, Senior Director of Development with Middle River Power. Dan, thanks for making time to come on the show today.
Joe, hey, I appreciate it. It's great to be here with you.
This is awesome. Well, I can tell the audience right now you're going to be in for a good show. Dan has got lots of good stuff to share. He's very candid, very real, very raw, very honest. So this could really end up in lots of different directions. Dan and I go back a little ways. I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's going to add a ton of value today in all the topics that we're going to cover. But let's start it off with the beginning. Give us a little bit on your background and kind of how you got to be, where you are in our niche today, renewable energy.
Yeah. Appreciate the accolades, Joe. I hope I can live up to them. Yeah, like you said, Senior Director of Development here at Middle River Power now. Awesome company to be a part of. And it's been quite the story to get here. I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree in 2012 from Gonzaga University. I'm sitting about 2 miles from it right now here in Spokane. And right out of college, ended up at a utility in Arizona, a large unnamed utility in Arizona. And it was a great experience and really transformational in the sense of I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I'm really glad the way things worked out. So I ended up as an intern in the engineering group, and they were starting up a rotational program, and they actually sent us out to be operators at their power plants and kind of qualify up to shift supervisor. And at the time, as an engineering student, you're kind of sold this whole image of what your career is going to be, and it was really kind of an eye-opener and almost a letdown at the time, where you're literally in like Christmas Eve at midnight out at a power plant making things work. And I didn't appreciate what I was doing at the time, but looking back at it, I do. It gave me an incredible amount of respect for the men and women that keep our not just power grid running, but the entire society. I mean, everybody, men and women in uniform, and those working, in city departments, just keeping the general infrastructure moving. Really a good experience. So all that is to say, I did that for a few years out at a large combined cycle plant in Western Phoenix. And through, kind of the tail here of my career is going to be shaking the right hands and having the right mentors. And I had a fantastic mentor at APS, and he introduced me to some people over at an operating company, NACE. And a couple years after being in the utility space, I moved over to the third-party operations space, went over there, started up a roaming field technical service group that went and did outages, and had a bunch of fantastic guys that I worked with doing that. And I've kept in touch with a lot of them, and even kind of hired some of them in at some of the plants that we're currently operating. And that transformed into some really interesting international work where I was helping with commissionings and building of plants in Indonesia and Singapore, and did some consulting work throughout Asia, and particularly when that was done, moved to the Caribbean, spent a summer down in the Caribbean. That was, just some fantastic experiences, met some great people, great perspectives. And, when that kind of started to dry up, I became a director over at NACE, and I was operating MRP's plants for them on behalf of NACE. And again, the theme of knowing the right people, having the right mentors, working with the folks at MRP, they were adding a lot of value to my career and teaching me the way that, kind of the project finance side works, and the way that the whole kind of fund structure works. And then through, some really good fortune and them taking a chance on me, pulled me over to Middle River Power themselves in the early 2020s, I guess, 2021. And I've been here ever since, and started in the ops group. And basically we looked at California, which is where we have a heavy presence, and the senior management team there gave me the opportunity to start up a development group at MRP, and we've grown that into what it is today with 12 or 13 projects in the pipeline and a bunch of people, and appreciate you bringing us a lot of those people. So that's kind of the roundabout story of how I got here. Basically, just knowing the right people and taking their advice.
Yeah. I appreciate you, appreciate that background. You said several things that really kind of jumped out to me. And I definitely want to get into talking about the projects and the kind of work that you're doing and, the slow domination you're making here in the US. It's impressive. I love, because I think the audience watching can certainly resonate. We all can in our own way, but you get put in situations typically early in your career that don't always make sense, right? Because we kind of lack experience, we lack insight. But you look back years later and you're like, man, thank you so much for being in that situation, because it gives you such a deep understanding and a presence and an ability to relate with that part of the business. And I'm convinced that the reason you've been successful in the role you're in is because you do have a deep understanding of the business as a whole, because you've spent time in so many different places and even starting off early in your career. And I think, that's something that, especially the younger generation don't overlook or turn your nose up at stuff like that, because you can find out 10, 15 years later, that was like a golden opportunity, that that 2020 hindsight, right?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that was hugely beneficial in being able to see what makes up the day-to-day life of those that are literally working with the projects you're building. I've tried to keep that in mind now when we're designing some of these projects. How can we make jobs easier? Do we make sure that we have an access road in a certain location to get a little car down instead of having to walk tools in, and things like that. And really just the level of appreciation it gives you for, now I'm lucky enough to be at home on holidays and particularly the big ones, Christmas, Easter, those kind of things. And you do think about, you're thankful for the folks that are out there, really making your holiday possible. They're at work, they're having to miss time with their family, and that really human element is what was probably most impactful, not just the technical side, but really recognizing when you go out to the sites, showing the appreciation and genuinely meaning it in, buying the folks lunch or taking them to dinner, or even, information is currency, telling them what's going on at the company or why we made a decision that we made. Because so much of, and I'll kind of hark back to, I'll throw to another podcast, but, there's Simon Sinek does a great TED talk on that golden circle of, how you're doing or what you're doing, how you're doing it, and why you're doing it. And trying to explain that why to the folks that are just so far separated from that goes a long way. So that's been something I've tried to kind of carry throughout my career too, is just explain why we're doing something. And a lot of times you can get over a lot of angst that sometimes manifests in the field just because you're so far from the decision. Even though it directly affects you, you can bridge that gap. And that's really been beneficial throughout my career, is being able to kind of remember that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. I think that continuity can get lost.
Yep.
And I think all kinds of problems happen as well. But if you can keep the continuity, it makes so many things so much better, And I think it's something you guys do really well at MRP. You guys have a very real human element. It is very genuine. The work that we've done together and things that I've seen and heard it always kind of circles back to there's a genuineness and a realness that's there. I think it goes a long ways. I tell people all the time in the recruiting side of life that it's humans dealing with humans. It's what it is. I mean, we can classify strategic capabilities, tactic capabilities, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it's someone just pretty much like you, and they wanted to be treated right. They want to be told the truth, respected, et cetera. So that gets lost on some companies, but you guys get that right. And I think I like what you said too about the infrastructure. It's so true. I mean, unless you want to go back to candles, man, this is where it's at. And it sounds biased because we're in this space, but power, the infrastructure, the grid, the distribution, transmission, it is key to the way we live our lives. And you're right. Everybody on the front line to the ones making, the projects happen for the future, because the demand curve is always rising. Yeah, it's pretty indispensable. I would definitely say.
Yeah.
Tell us. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Well, and one of the things that I've had to, and this is kind of a little bit of a tangent. Part of me being here today too is credit to my wife and helping me make some of the decisions, the right decisions, I'll say. It's in this industry, it's easy to say this, but there is a lot of honor too in what we're doing. And I give this talk to the group a lot. We're creating electricity, a product that is, like you said, absolutely indispensable to society. And there is a level of honor and being proud in what you're doing there. And truly, I mean, I really take that seriously, and there's every industry I think you can kind of back yourself into, I'm providing a service or a product that is valuable in some subset of people's lives. And that's been really helpful for me, along the way. This sounds like a nice, clean story, but my dad's a pilot, and I always wanted to be a pilot, as evidenced by my little airplane here behind me. And I almost dove off this career path and started to push toward being a pilot. And my wife, God bless her, helped wrangle me back to, you're looking for something that you kind of have, and you do have fun at work, and you do enjoy what you're doing. And helped remind me of that too. And it kind of reinvigorated my excitement for this, to recognize that sometimes it may seem like you're not always doing what you were, meant to do. But when you really kind of look at it, everybody has just such an important role. And I mean that, like you said, throughout the organization, MRP, which is why we try to be very personal and kind of, we treat it like a flat organization. Everybody's welcome to the table. You see something that I don't see. And credit to my boss, Claude, he always uses this line, my idea always wins. But the problem with that mentality is sometimes that comes across as bossy. What we try to do with my idea always wins is I take what you have to say and it becomes my idea, right? Like if you give me information that I didn't otherwise know, I need to be able to shift and adjust to that information. Right. Now my idea changes. Now we're all on the same page. And, basically you've convinced me to convince myself. And that's what we really value in people at all levels of the organization, is they bring a perspective we don't have. And if they're excited about what they're doing and I'm excited about it, then we're going to come to a good conclusion. So there was kind of a thought, but
no, I mean, it's a good thought too. I mean, having a real part of, you got to see the value in what you're doing. I think that's very, very real. There's got to be something that drives you every day besides, getting a paycheck. If that's it, then I would argue you're in the wrong spot. You probably should go look for something else. So, and I think tying into that is important, because we know in what we do, it's some days are going to be easy. Some days are going to be really hard. You need something to kind of push you through the tough days. It's just part of life, And I like the idea you threw out there about the way you think. I've said it very early. I've gone on record and said it, that, you guys are successful. And I think in the early days when we first met, I was kind of surprised at how many projects you guys could push across the finish line. Development it's a risky business. You got to look at a bunch to find the one that works. I mean, we all know this, but you guys consistently were winning. And I even remember telling my father about that, who's, in the space as well. And I was like, man, these guys, they win at a higher percentage than most people. And I think it's because of that. There's no pride. It's the best idea wins. Let's move forward. Let's pivot and make it happen. You do that consistently, you're going to win more consistently. And so I think the proof's in the pudding with what you're saying. The portfolio speaks for itself. I really believe that. Speaking of kind of portfolio and work, what's some of the projects you guys are working on now? What's kind of hot over at MRP?
Yeah, so anybody in the kind of electrical space knows California is really a hot market right now. They often make the news for reasons that aren't the best. Keeping the lights on is a difficult task in California. We're starting to look a little bit at the East Coast. I'll get into that, but ultimately the West Coast power market's really dynamic right now. There's a lot of load out here in California, and some of the other Western states are very much on the bleeding edge of kind of the energy transition and what the future of green energy looks like. They typically legislate and or subsidize initiatives that occur before the rest of the country. So, in California, we own a lot of thermal assets in California, some combined cycle, and a lot of peakers out there. And one of the marks of the energy transition is obviously decarbonization of the grid and the existing thermal portfolio. So what we've kind of done is taken our existing thermal portfolio and tried to trying to futurize it, future-proof it, if you will, and decarbonize it. And what that means is, your combined cycle plants run, they're highly efficient, they're large, the demand curves are, 8 to 24 hours at a time they kind of run, and those are pretty predictable as a base load or intermediate load facility. But our peakers run, somewhere between 3 and 5% of the year. And one of the interesting dynamics in California is they're short on power. They have a ton of projects waiting to be developed, but they got nowhere to put them. And they have nowhere to put them because the grid, if you will, the interconnection is full. Basically, all the transmission lines are, if you think of them like a pipe, they're full. So
exactly.
There's no shortage of a willingness to develop renewable energy projects out there, but there is a shortage of existing infrastructure to be able to kind of swallow down those development projects. So what we did is took our existing thermal assets, our peakers in particular, that run a few percent of the year, and we said, hey, there's all this interconnection that doesn't get utilized for 95% of the year. So what can we do with that? So we really looked at this kind of hybridization type model that you've heard thrown around out west here more, which is you basically utilize that slack interconnection that you have by what we're doing is placing a battery there. So, it can charge in the middle of the day with excess solar and then discharge during the evening ramp when the sun goes down, but yet the market might not have been aggressive enough to clear running our thermal peaker and the gas costs associated with that. But it does clear the hurdle of running the battery because you charge so cheap in the middle of the day. So we've had a lot of success with taking advantage of our existing interconnection. We have some greenfield projects in the queue, but really, like you pointed out, kind of the high win rate is a product of, we came in with a well-positioned portfolio, and the valuable interconnection is really where we have set ourselves apart.
Yeah. I remember we had a kind of conversation about that here a little while back, and I think it's a great strategy. Because that is the bottleneck. It's the transmission system, right? It's being able to wield the power that exists, and so finding a creative solution around that has been brilliant, because that's where everybody else is struggling, right? We see that on the West Coast. You see all the projects in the pipeline, and then you're kind of stuck at the moment, right? Where it's great that you can build it, but you can't do anything with it.
Yeah, and we've one of the interesting things about the grid, and honestly, some of these green energy projects themselves is solar power makes a lot of sense out west. There's a lot of sunny days, there's a lot of land, et cetera, et cetera. But the load centers are the cities, LA, San Francisco, San Diego, pick your city. And it's hard to build a solar plant in a city because they take so much land. So the easy answer was, hey, let's go outside the city, buy some farmland, lay down a solar plant. We'll plug into whatever transmission line is by us and go. Well, everybody did that. So all the lines coming into the cities are full, and it's extremely difficult to build a renewable energy project in a city. Land values are much higher. There's certainly a component of not in my backyard. And as a result, you kind of end up at this bottleneck where you need to build hundreds of millions of dollars of transmission lines to wheel power in from farmland where the solar is into the city. But of course, then the ratepayers have to pick up that cost. That's untenable. And the developers don't want to pay for it. So now you're kind of at this weird kind of standoff of who's going to build more transmission so I can build my project out there, and or who's going to build a project in the city. But the problem is building a project in the city probably is not going to meet the decarbonization requirements that a lot of these municipalities and states want to meet, because compact power plants are thermal plants.
Exactly.
Will take up a lot of space, and batteries are an answer. But one of the things that I think gets forgotten, particularly in some maybe government circles, is batteries don't produce anything. They just store the power, right? It's the meme of like plugging the extension cord into itself. Like it doesn't. You still have to get the power in. So
I love it.
Yeah, we're kind of taking advantage of that middle of the day high solar when the lines are congested. We can pull off of those lines at a kind of intermediate location, and then discharge into the city when the solar plants go away at night. Those lines dramatically open up, and so that's kind of the situation, I guess.
What do you just kind of pulling on that thread a little bit? What do you see as a projection? How does that problem get solved? We've the regulatory side is really challenging. I mean, you've seen transmission lines, trying to get run through several states. I mean, that's a nightmare on steroids. But it's because it's difficult to run it through just one state through several jurisdictions. It's a big issue. The infrastructure transmission distribution system is aging in our country. Again, crossing state lines, that has all kinds of unique problems to it. I mean, some of these things are going to trigger FERC. What does your gut say? Where does that go? How does that problem potentially get solved?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've had endless meetings internally about this. We're on different, regulatory calls and internal committees to send comments to regulators and things like that. But
sure,
the Dan Harmon opinion is, we are in, and it's overused, but I think it's used correctly. We are in a transitional phase right now. There certainly is, and I think you kind of see it happen across the country, right? The West Coast, a lot of the coal plants have been retired. A lot of the inefficient once through cooling type plants, or even some of the really old peakers have been retired. You're left with efficient thermal generation, and out east, you're starting to see it happen, right? The large coal plants are falling away. Some of the more inefficient peaker plants are falling away. So anyway, we're in the middle of that transition. I think battery storage I think it's transitional. The battery storage concept is a means to an end, and the end might not include battery storage. That technology is rapidly evolving. I think this is a good answer for utilizing interconnection that may exist. But, ultimately, in order for the grid to be more green, solar is a good resource during the day. Wind, I think, we maybe have reached a critical mass on wind. It's just pretty unpredictable. But all this is to say, I think at the end of the day, thermal generation will maintain a strong foothold in the energy mix. The pie chart that is, I think thermal is always going to be a visual part of that. We're reasonably bullish on hydrogen right now. The issue is it's really interesting. You go to these conferences and talk to people. We've got plants that we've retrofitted that are ready to burn hydrogen right now. And I guess for the chemistry lesson for kind of the folks that don't live in this space, natural gas is burned. It produces NOx and CO and CO2. Right. When you burn hydrogen, it basically produces water vapor and NOx. You can control the NOx via an SCR, but ultimately your CO2 and CO problem are gone. So that's the decarbonization. And you still have a thermal plant that's dispatchable, takes a small footprint. The maintenance and parts available for it are not as, kind of R&D phase as like a battery is. They're well known. So anyway, all that is to say, again, we're reasonably bullish on hydrogen. The problem is making it or getting it, right? Everybody can burn it. Everybody wants to burn it. Cars want to burn it. Buses want to burn it. Power plants want to burn it. We have the capability to burn it. But making it is what's difficult. There's different breeds of hydrogen and colors. There's green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is where you break the hydrogen off natural gas. Doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion, because now I still have the carbon problem. And then water, breaking the H2 molecule off the O is great, but that takes a significant amount of energy, more energy to get out of the hydrogen. Right. So, I think that there's a market. This is going to come around, I promise. The thought here being potentially you take advantage of cheap O&M cost of solar out in the middle of nowhere. So build your solar plant out in the farmland. Instead of having to wheel the power into a city via a line that doesn't exist, you can utilize that inexpensive electrical power, split the hydrogen off of water at a remote location, and then pipe it into a thermal plant in the city. And that's a little bit more manageable of an approach, because now I have a dispatchable resource in the city. I have a hydrogen pipe that is built to hold hydrogen, because hydrogen embrittles pipes and cracks and leaks and all that. So you can build your, chromium pipeline into the city. So long term, I think that's a potential answer for thermal plants, but we're talking 20 years away. And, dare I say, I think the small modular reactor concept has a lot of legs. We're not in the space, but that's a really compelling technology. And Dan Harmon's personal opinion, not the opinion of the company, is, nuclear power seems seems to have so many advantages. And I understand the fear around it. Obviously,
Sure.
there's, a bunch of headlines that make people fearful of it, but
Sure.
we've really improved the technology and the safety of that energy source over the last 3-4 decades. So
Right. Right.
anyway, that's a long answer, I know, but
No, it's great. No, I mean, I love the perspective, I mean, you, with your vantage point and experience, you see the things that you see, and not everybody sees it, I mean, for me and, certainly the audience to kind of hear your thoughts on how that could develop and play out. I mean, I find it pretty fascinating. And I would just echo your comment on the nuclear too. I think there is a place for it in the mix. I mean, we do a lot of renewable stuff, clean tech, but I do think that I think there's a part for kind of everything to play to some extent. It's difficult to kind of go all in on one thing. I think it increases your risk profile, quite frankly, and I think you can mitigate it by playing with different technologies, different industries. I think there can be some hand holding going on for the greater good. At the end of the day, we can't lose sight of the problem we're trying to solve. I'm not looking to go back to candles anytime soon. So anything we can do to keep this alive is good.
Well, you make a great point about diversification. I believe it was there was a consulting firm, I think it was E3, who did a study years back, and they said if you're going to make California, completely carbon free, you need something like 4 times the load built in solar. You need to have 4 times the load built in plants, stored in batteries for use overnight to then wheel it into the cities, and that's a staggering amount of land and panels and capital. And it's no secret, the power prices out west are not cheap. And I think eventually you're going to reach a point where, we have to take a step back and make the realization that, okay, thermal does have a place in the mix, whether it's natural gas or hydrogen. We can't put all of our eggs in solar. We can't put all of our eggs in wind. But yeah, to your point, diversification is going to be the key. And I think diversification of location, because the building transmission lines is just, it's so expensive. And to your point, the regulatory hurdles and the price you pay for easements, you're going to have some load serving inside the city. And if that's thermal or small modular reactors or batteries that can take advantage of excess interconnection, then that'll be that.
No, I agree. At some point, what do you say? Yeah, you got to give a little to get a little.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see and understand the purist mentality, but I mean, that looks great on a whiteboard, but in the real world, it's not quite that clean and easy, a little messy.
And you just have so many people that are just so, generally the most well kind of publicized people are those that are just super dogmatic about their position. And, not to make it a political statement, but, loosely, politics is just kind of getting the best deal you can. And sometimes the best deal you can is a blend. Yeah, we can favor a pure green play and prioritize that in the mix. But ultimately, you just can't be big D dogmatic on all this. You've got to compromise and recognize that in order to get to the end goal of decarbonization, it's going to be years. And you have people willing to do it. But you've just got to be realistic about the transition it takes to get there.
Yeah, great point. Realistic is really key. And sometimes that unfortunately gets left out of the conversation. But I would agree. Let's pivot a little bit. What's it like in the day in the life of Dan Harmon? One of the questions I like to ask is what's your day like? People that watching the podcast here, and what is it? Like, how does your day play out? Your role. We talked about some of the things that you're doing, but what's it like a day in your life? I'm kind of curious. How does it play out for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll give you the chronological kind of literal, but I'm lucky enough to live up here in Spokane, Washington. For those that don't know, that's on the eastern side of the state of Washington, not near Seattle, closer to Idaho. I live here. My wife's family's from here. I'm on the road a lot, so it's been a great support system. So I've kind of got to caveat all of that with that's why I'm here. The company's headquartered in Chicago. We're working in California, a lot of time on a plane, which I do. I do enjoy the travel. But day to day, basically, I'm a kind of early rise kind of guy. Get up. Ultimately, I wake up in the 5 o'clock range. I've got a lot of emails and text messages from suppliers in China because they're at work. So respond to those.
Sure.
Get myself ready in the morning. Go sit out. go sit out in the kitchen, pop the computer open, do some emails, wait for the kids to get up and the wife to get up, kind of have breakfast with them, head into the office, and basically work all day. It's pretty much end-to-end phone calls, but they're generally pretty fun. We've got it, like you pointed out earlier, great group, bunch of high performance athletes on the team. It's really fun to put our heads together and have fun while we're doing it. And then I will say the focal point of the day, which I'm ultra intentional about, is at 3:30 to 4:30. Nobody can call me because I'm at CrossFit. Nobody, if something is burning, I will not answer the phone. I will be at the gym. Nobody bother me. Anyway, after that, go home, get the kids ready, play with the kids for a little while, make dinner, hang out with the family in the evening. And then, once everybody goes to bed, I'll usually pop my computer open for a few more hours, maybe to the, disgruntlement of my wife. But I sit on the couch with her. So, I make up for that. But yeah, it's as good as it gets. But when I'm home, it's great. I mean, it's a lot of work, but they do respect the work-life balance. If you've got things going on, or like I said, carving that time out of my afternoon, everybody's really generous about respecting that. So, it's just kind of a day.
That's awesome. No, that's good. Whenever I ask that question, I get so many different answers, and I love it because it's, not one size fits all. Some people get up a little early, some a little later, go to bed early, go to bed late, different, parts of their day, they're doing different things, what they want to do in the morning. In your case, right, catching up with some people in, obviously significantly different time zones, getting a beat on that, get it under control, and then dovetail into your day. And have you always been into working out? Has that always been a part of your regime, staying fit?
In the last 7-8 years, my wife is very fit, very good about making sure that our diets are good. And I am also a big believer in, the endorphins that you get from working out, or even watching your diet, and you generally feel better and are more aware. I'm a big proponent of that, and even kind of make jokes about it in some of our development meetings. I'll try and get little trinkets with the company brand on it, whether it's like a stress ball or a rubber band or something to, keep you physically active, even if it's really mundane. It's important to basically keep yourself healthy so you can function at work at your highest level. And honestly, even in your home life, right? Like, you want to be able to run around with your kids and go and travel with your spouse and do all those things and not feel kind of yucky during it.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think it makes a big difference. That ability to kind of disconnect and just get away from the work. That's something that I've had to work on, I would say over the last couple of years in a very intentional way. I've always liked to work out. So it's, I say fairly natural, fairly easy to want to go do something, whether it's run or, do the weights or some combination of both. But I think the disconnection is really, for me, been very powerful also. I find myself, quite frankly, towards the end of my workouts, being even more creative. There's things that, as a matter of fact, I was doing farmers walks the other day. Here we go, right out in the driveway, doing the farmers walks. I feel like my hands are going to detach from my wrists.
Yes.
And I dropped the weight, and I was like, that's such a great idea. And so I recorded it. I sent it over to my assistant. I said, hey, this is going to be in our outreach campaign. Go ahead and get it typed up, get it going, send it to me. I'll give it a quick review. Let's make it happen. But it was in that moment of just, sweating in the 90 plus degree heat, that getting away from the work and letting the mind be free, just to kind of wander where it wanders. I mean, I'm convinced it's not an idea I would have come up had I been sitting in my office. So I love the balance. I think the endorphins are huge. So that's exciting. All right. That's what it takes.
And that's a great perspective. Yeah, you're right. I mean, after you work out, your mind is so much clearer, and even spending time with different people in the gym that you don't work with, hearing their life. And, it's just a neat way to kind of fulfill a whole bunch of different needs in your life. And to your point, you can have a bad day and go kind of clear your mind. And even to a degree, if you're in the pain cave of some brutal workout, it is almost kind of like a spiritual experience too. You really kind of focus on your body and the things around you and the world around you. It's kind of sounds maybe hippie-ish, but it's a really nice experience to break away and kind of focus on yourself, and it gives you perspective in the rest of your life. And then I can go home and I'm, generally a pretty good mood after that.
Yeah. Pleasant for the wife and children is always a good thing. For
Yes,
sure.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, obviously the health benefits, but yeah, just I do think that otherwise you can get burned out. I think that's something too, you wonder about people kind of coming into, entering into the market, entering into their career, a couple years out of school. It can be tempting to burn the candle really hard, prove yourself, step up, make a difference and all these things. And that's good. You have to push the needle. But at the same time, the earlier you can get a good balance in your life, the better, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you got to be able to sustain a higher level of activity for longer periods of time. I think it's counterintuitive. Oftentimes, the more intentionally you do step away at prescribed times and places, the more you're going to bring to the table in the long run. Otherwise you fizzle out. We've seen it. People they just dry up. Just too many days, too many hours. One of the things I want to ask you too before we finish up the show is, we can go either way with this question. Okay, so what is one of the biggest lessons that you've learned, in terms of professionally speaking, and I think it can come from big wins. I think it can come from big failures. Some of the biggest misses I've had have taught me some of my biggest lessons. But looking to give a little back, what's some advice you could give to the audience, give to us, whether particularly in the space or just professionally speaking, that has really made a massive impact on you, something you think about and kind of go back to at times to continue to push you to get to that next level, as you've risen through your career?
Yeah, that's a big one. It probably goes without saying, and honesty is a big one. And I don't mean honesty, I don't mean honesty necessarily in the cliche sense, but there's a lot of folks at the company, myself included, and those that are in my organization that are responsible for some really big decisions, and we focus on you're the guy or you're the gal. Like there is no, but you're the interconnection expert or you're the whatever expert it is. You make the call. You're the so
right.
I've been in that role and been wrong, and I find it's really important as soon as you figure out you were wrong. Don't be the last one with the secret. Call somebody. Hey, I messed this up. This is going to cost this, or this is going to delay. And kind of have that. Don't bring just a problem though. Bring a potential solution. So it's kind of owning up to a mistake that you made, and not bringing your boss just the problem. Bring them. Hey, this is wrong, or I messed this up, and here's the roadmap to fix it. And it's kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Like, hey, my bad. I recognize it was wrong. I'm not hiding it, but let me not have you jump out the window by here's what I'm going to do to fix it. Do you veto that? Right. So
right.
That's been really important. That's just kind of a functional thing to do. We all operate that way, and I've tried to operate that way. And it seems really simple, but there have been plenty of times where you're making that phone call like, oh man, I've been upset at other people for making the same mistake. I just made it, but typically it's much easier to recover if you're not drowning alone. So there's that. And then I guess to harking back to the beginning of the conversation, functionally the MRP way of doing business, and this is why I love it here, is we make a better friend than an enemy. I mean, you get so much more done by being friendly with somebody and respecting the position that they're in, whether it's some at a regulatory agency or somebody at the plant or CEO of another company. You don't understand the roadblocks that they have in front of them. Your main goal is to articulate your problem, see if they can help you, and if they can't, talk about the tools they can use, and do it in a friendly way. And honestly, we have a lot of success by just showing up somewhere and having dinner with someone. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but so much of our success I attribute to showing up. And I have a story. I don't know if you've got time for a story, but
yeah, let's do it. I love stories. You bet.
We were ordering transformers, big GSUs from a factory in Mexico. And for weeks and months, I wasn't getting answers, wasn't getting, where are we at on budget, timeline, schedule? Where are we at? And I'm getting nothing. So I was like, I'm going to show up. So I booked a plane ticket, sent it to him and said, I'm coming on this day. And that elicited a little bit of consternation on the other side. I showed up to this factory. They rolled out the red carpet. They had a conference room ready. They had everybody sitting there with the presentation. In 30 minutes, I felt better. We all went, had a nice lunch that eventually dovetailed right into dinner. And we had a great night getting to know each other. And, it has gone such a long way. And from that day on, anything I need, I have that person on text. Speed dial, I can show up down there. They visit me. If I need a transformer spot, they're telling me the lead time's 3 years. You call them up. Hey, is it really 3 years? And so that it just goes so far. Treating people with the respect of taking the time to show up and listen. So anyway, that's kind of one of the MRP schools of business is that personal touch of having a real human connection and not just. You're a regulator and you're trying to screw me. That's not the case. They basically have their list of duties. You have yours.
Right.
How can we make that work?
Yeah. I think it's great advice. I appreciate you throwing it out there. Again, even comment we made kind of in the beginning of the show, just the human, just being real, just being human and acknowledging and accepting it and just meeting people where they're at. I think sometimes the expectations can get high. I think sometimes in our own head too, right? I think you push them higher than they need to be. And then it puts you in a place that gets very difficult to sort of operate because you're working under constraints that are just not real. It's kind of fantasy. And it's actually, I would say, stifling, your growth and the ability to build relationships. I think taking that step back and just, kind of see the other person. What do they want? They probably want what you want. Treat me right. Talk to me like I'm a person. I got problems, I'm running into issues, maybe something at the house. If you can accept that and work with it, I think that's what just people want at the end of the day. So you guys do that in spades. So it's a great story. And I hear it and I'm like, yeah, that sounds like an MRP story to me.
Yep.
And I like the fact you brought up about the trust. We've all been in this situation. It ain't working. I made the wrong decision, make the call. I think it's easy for people early in their career to think they can overcome it. Problem is that's a snowball going downhill. It gets bigger faster than you think. And you don't want to be the guy at the end because at the end, unfortunately, there's probably not much that can be done. It could have been done with a bit of early notice. I think the upside and the silver lining in that, I love your example, is that when you make the call that's difficult to make. Number one, chances are the guy you're calling, they've made that call too. They know exactly how you're feeling. Number one. Two, you're establishing trust. They can trust you now to a completely different level. And I've seen where people have made missteps, have owned it, have worked hard to reconcile, and actually keep moving up through the company at an aggressive pace because you're trustworthy. And I know that if something is to go sideways, you'll be the first to let me know, right? You got my blind side, which I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think you get a group of people where everybody's looking at everybody else as six, and you're in great shape. You're harder to beat, less likely to lose in whatever decision, you're making. So no, it's great advice. I really appreciate it. We're basically winding it up. Let's take the next minute or so. What's any final thoughts, anything you want to share with the audience about, yourself, what you've been doing, even some of the projects you're, on the horizon, et cetera. We can go anywhere. This is an open-ended, any other final thoughts for us?
Nothing in particular. The industry's been great to me. I for a few years taught at Gonzaga on the side, and I always kind of used to push some of the students that were thinking about this career, encourage them into it. This is kind of a hidden niche. Nobody really thinks about where their electricity comes from, but it's a huge industry filled with a lot of great folks. Particularly the renewable space. It's a diverse space. There's a lot of there's cultural diversity, there's diversity of thought. It's really interesting. And again, there's a lot of excitement and kind of honor in what we're doing here. One of the things that I would impress upon the younger generation and those that I kind of interface with that are getting into their careers is, much like my story, that kind of odd job in the beginning that maybe isn't what was sold to you initially could end up being super valuable. And those first few years, unfortunately, it can't be just the paycheck. You've got to look at it as a springboard. And I get it. You've got a whole life in front of you. It's just so much. You can't quite read the tea leaves as to where this is all going. So really, if you just kind of jump in 2 feet and with the personal connections, make those connections, have good mentors, they'll really look out for you and pull you along. So, again, just kind of encourage to be friendly with those around you. It goes a long way. I mean, I met you through work and consider you a friend, and that's how I like to. That's kind of how I like to operate. So if people can see it as, yeah, it's a job, but you spend at least 40 hours a week here, and even if you might not like the exact work, there's a lot of good in the people you're surrounded with, and try and find that and build off that. So that's I guess that's what I'd leave you with. And
That's good stuff, man. I love it.
There's plenty of people that would say, Dan can be a little rough around the edges, and I can, but it kind of goes back to that being real. And I know it comes across bad sometimes, but you generally know what you're getting with me, for better or worse. I'm sure the senior management at MRP, I've had a couple hand in the face moments when I've spoken, and I'm trying to fix that, but it is what it is.
Oh, I love it, man. That's what I love about you. You're just real, raw and honest. I mean, that's one of the things and I hear people talk. I mean, other people in the industry that know you, that I know, have said the same thing. Dan is you what you see is what you get. He'll always be honest with you. He'll always be straight with you. You'll know where he stands and what his comment and or opinion or suggestion is. He doesn't leave anything behind. But the upside is that always gives you something to work with and to keep moving forward. And so I think the genuine honesty is really, it's a justice and a charitableness to the person that you're working with. Because if they got to sit there and try to read you and figure you out, it's just so much more complicated. So I find it refreshing. I like it. People I've talked to like it. So, I keep doing what you're doing, man. You're obviously on the right track. So
that's a great perspective. I'm gonna co-opt that line. It's charitable to be honest like that. I love it.
Absolutely. There you go. Yeah. We heard it here on InnerGenius first. All right.
Take that one to the bank.
Exactly. This is great. Well, I've enjoyed having you on the show. Appreciate you making the time to be here. And if anybody's got any questions or wants to circle back with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Probably my email, dharmon at mrpgenco.com. That'll be the best way. I have that email tied to my hip all the time. So
perfect. But how about LinkedIn? If they want
LinkedIn too,
that works.
By my name on LinkedIn, Daniel Harmon, I think it's under. I'm in Middle River Power. There's some goofy black and white picture of me, and that's who I am.
All right, awesome, very good. Well, I appreciate again you making the time. It was a lot of fun today, and I want to share with the audience. Look, if you want to get in the hot seat like Dan and do a show, you can see right here behind me, innergeniuspodcast.com. Just remember, each one of us has a genius inside of us. It's up to you to discover it, harness it, and share it with the world. So the question always is, what's your inner genius?
This is the Padua Podcast Network. PaduaPodcastNetwork.com.